Lionhearts, it's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? Yeah, I know, it's still a little tough. We're all still dealing with what's going on in the world, but no reason we shouldn't be entertained today, right? I kept thinking and thinking, I'm like, what can we do that's not necessarily a grave? What can we do that we don't need to pay an admission or some place that's already been organized for us? What can we do? And I thought of something that I've wanted to do for quite a while, and I said, this is a perfect opportunity. We can drive, hop out of the car, and just talk about it there. Now what I'm talking about is, I want to show you guys today where Mr. Ed was born. I loved that show on Nick at Night and Nickelodeon when I was growing up, and there was just something always great about it. Such a funny idea, even though they had done talking animals before. Mr. Ed, just, there was something about him that was so lovable. So let's go out and see where he was born, talk about a little bit behind the scenes of the show, and talk about what happened to Mr. Ed after the show went off the air. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins now. And what's your story? Do you have any thoughts on Mr. Ed? You've probably never seen Mr. Ed, have you? Tell you what, y'all, if you could talk, you would probably be better than Mr. Ed. For this one, we're going to take our walk today out in Chatsworth. A horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course. That is, of course, unless the horse is the famous Mr. Ed. Yeah, let's go see it. Mr. Ed was basically a television show where a man named Wilbur Post had a horse that could talk and talk only to him. Now, where this idea came from was Arthur Lubin and George Burns decided they were going to try and do a television show together. You see, what happened was Arthur Lubin was the man who had directed the Francis pictures, The Talking Mule, where Francis could only talk to Donald O'Connor. And so when he tried to secure the rights to make it a television show, he was unsuccessful with getting the rights. So he was trying to figure out another way to do this, and his secretary at the time told him about a kid's book called The Talking Horse. He liked the idea and optioned those rights, and that was the start of Mr. Ed. Now, he ended up actually giving his secretary co-creator rights to this, and George Burns financed the first pilot. Now, the first pilot was actually called The Wonderful World of Wilbur Pope, and it starred an actor named George McKay, and it was not the same Ed. None of the television networks wanted it, and so they decided to hire a new writer, get new actors, and try and make another pilot, and this time seek sponsors to get it on the air. And so when they were talking about who to recast, George Burns said, hey, what about Alan Young? He looks like the kind of a guy that a horse would talk to. And so they cast Alan Young as Wilbur Post, no longer Wilbur Pope. And the show went on the air in 1961. Now that red barn back there is a turn of the century 1900s barn, and that is actually the barn that used to be called the Harvester Farms barn. And in the 1950s, this became the Palomino Horse Association headquarters, and in 1949, a horse named Harvester was used to breed other horses, and in 1949 he had an offspring named Bamboo Harvester that became the horse they trained to be Mr. Ed. Now, since they had had so much luck with the Francis movies and the Francis trainer, they hired the same trainer to train Ed, and it was Lester Hilton. And Lester Hilton was a protege of Will Rogers, and Lester had these unique ways of making the animals do tricks. He was a very, very good trainer. And so with Mr. Ed, there was a false rumor out there that the way they made Mr. Ed talk was by putting peanut butter under his gums, but Alan Young said that was actually something he said as a joke to a fan, and that it just kept spreading. But the real way that they did this, and it was not harmful to Bamboo Harvester at all, was they said that he would always have a bridle on
Ed on Bamboo Harvester, and he would run a fishing line through there and then run that through Ed's teeth, and Lester would be at the feet of Ed, so when they would need Ed to move his lips to talk, he would just kind of move that fishing line, and it would basically just be a little bit almost like a mosquito flying around, just like an irritant, but it actually didn't hurt Ed. And they said they actually only had to do this for the first season because by the second season, Alan Young said he was out riding horses and was out riding Ed with Les Hilton on another horse that they ended up using for publicity photos as Ed later on, named Pumpkin. And he said they were out walking around and all of a sudden they stopped talking. Alan Young said, "I stopped talking," and Les said, "Look at Ed," and he looked down and his mouth was moving. And he said that by the second season, the horse that was Mr. Ed was so smart that he knew when Wilbur, Alan Young, quit talking, that was his cue to start talking. So Alan Young said that Bamboo Harvester was an amazing horse to work with because he said he was so intuitive when they would teach him a bit, you know, like a little gag for each week's show. He was very quick to learn it, holding the pencil in his mouth, playing paddle ball, sitting on a couch, carrying carrots across the room and putting them down without eating them, all kinds of things. They said he was extremely smart because he could let Les know when he had to go to the bathroom. He was basically potty trained. Alan said, you know, I'd been on a lot of sets with a lot of animals and you could always tell when there were horses on a set, but with Ed, he said, you'd walk in there and you couldn't smell anything, and he said Ed had a certain eye roll whenever he had to go pee, and Les would see it and he would say, hey, we got to take Ed outside, and they would take him outside and he would pee on a stack of hay, and they said if he had to go number 2, that he would do a different kind of eye roll, and they would have someone run out with a pail and they would catch it and they would continue to work on a sweet smelling set. So you might be wondering, who was the voice of Mr. Ed and how did they find him? Well, they had done auditions looking for a voice actor to do Ed's voice, and they hadn't really found anyone that they were happy with. And one day they were out shooting publicity photos with Alan Young and Ed out at the farm where Les Hilton lived, and Les had been letting an actor named Alan Rocky Lane, who had made his name in westerns as the Red Rider, and he was staying at Les's house out in the barn, came walking out and said, hey Les, where can I find the cow feed? And they heard his voice and they said, that's our Ed. And they hired Alan Rocky Lane to be Ed for over 100 episodes of the Mr. Ed Show. Now, a major misconception about Mr. Ed was that he died in 1979. Now, sadly, in 1966, the Mr. Ed Show was canceled along with Petticoat Junction and Green Acres. Apparently there was a new head of the network that came in and changed up the family-friendly format a little bit. And Mr. Ed went off the air and never worked again. Now, sadly, he ended up passing away of kind of an accident in 1968 at the age of 19. However, there's a lot of speculation or a lot of confusion as to what really happened to Ed and why Saturday Night Live did a skit 10 years later claiming that Mr. Ed died then. So Alan Young basically told this story because he said even after the show went off the air, he was a frequent visitor out to see Ed, and he said basically it was kind of sad what happened. He said Ed was a bit of a heavier horse, and when he was laying down, he would kind of thrash around to get his footing to get back up. And Les Hilton had went to visit some family out of the state and had a friend looking after Bamboo Harvester. And unfortunately, when the friend saw Ed thrashing around, he didn't know that that's how he, that was his method to get up, and he thought he was having a seizure. So he gave him a tranquilizer that was unfortunately just too strong, and it ended up stopping Mr. Ed / Bamboo Harvester's heart. And they didn't tell the fans because they knew that it would be, you know, pretty traumatic for them. They cremated Ed, and when Lester Hilton died, their ashes were both scattered, or Mr. Ed's ashes were scattered with Les Hilton in an undisclosed location. Now, in 1979, Saturday Night Live did a whole piece on how Mr. Ed had passed away, and that was actually Pumpkin. That was another horse that looked like Ed that they used for publicity photos, and even after Ed died, they would say that was Mr. Ed, but it really wasn't. So Alan Young said, unfortunately, the horse
that has a headstone in Oklahoma is not the real Mr. Ed, but he said he didn't have the heart to tell anyone. He kind of wanted them to let the illusion live on. And the sponsor that eventually was the reason that Mr. Ed ended up on the air was Studebaker. And that's the story of Mr. Ed. So now let's head back into Hollywood and I'll show you where the studio was that Mr. Ed was filmed. Alright, we're back in Hollywood. You can see the Hollywood sign right there. You can still see some people out and about here in Hollywood. See Amoeba put all their events on hold. So I decided to pop into Fast Al's. They're open. Not many places are open right now. Go figure, huh? Yeah, it's a ghost town. Boy, did we ever think we would see the day where we couldn't dine in. Well, it's now known as Sunset Las Palmas Studios. It's had many names in the time I've lived in Hollywood, but at the time, Mr. Ed was filmed here. Both the pilot and the television show, when it was picked up, were filmed here when it was called McCadden Studios. So since George Burns already had a bit of a relationship here filming his show here, this is where he liked to film things that he was involved in with production. So they filmed the original pilot here for $70,000 with actor Scott McKay as Wilbur, but then when it didn't get picked up, Arthur Lubin went out and figured out that if he got his own sponsor, that he could get on that way. He wouldn't necessarily need a network, so that's what he did. He got, as I mentioned, Studebaker to fund this, and they went ahead and put it on the air, except by the time they made the new show with Alan Young, Arthur was actually in Europe filming a movie, so he didn't end up, even though it was his baby pretty much, he ended up not being the person who was directing the early episodes. But the first season was so successful that CBS ended up picking up the show, and that's what continued the show on for those 5 years. Now, they also filmed Beverly Hillbillies here, Petticoat Junction, Green Acres, and I couldn't figure out on my own what soundstage they filmed Mr. Ed at, so I asked my friend Scott Michaels, who has his YouTube channel, Dearly Departed Online, and he found an interesting picture for me, kind of helped figure out where they might have filmed it. So as you'll see in the picture, you can see Clint Eastwood cutting a rug out in front of Mr. Ed on the Soundstage 6. Now what's funny about that is that Mr. Ed had a lot of great cameo guest appearances. Mae West, Sharon Tate, Jack LaLanne, George Burns, and of course the infamous Clint Eastwood episode where Ed keeps popping in on the party line phone call conversations where Clint Eastwood's trying to woo women. Ed decides to ruin that for him in that episode, and that was in 1962 they filmed that. Or it could have been Soundstage 7, because as we come up to the gate for the pedestrian walkway, straight ahead is Stage 7. And they've got a big framed picture of Mr. Ed, aka Bamboo Harvester, and Alan Young, Wilbur Post. You're not practicing safe social distances, you two. Get him, Ja.
That's the highlight of his day.
These two. These two.
Social distancing, social schmishing.
Does Ja have your special? You're gonna upset him, Ja.
Go get it.
You better take it, Robert. He's not going to give it up.
Robert, where is it?
He only wants it because you want it. He only wants it, Robert, because you want it.
Where is it, good boy? Go get it. Go get it. That's yours, Robert. Go get it. Go get it, Robert.